And for more on this, I want to bring in Hunter Walker. He is a White House reporter for Yahoo News. Hunter, great to see you. Let's start with immigration. I mean, of course, President Trump is focusing on that caravan and lashing out at Democrats, saying somehow they're responsible. Is this an effective way of whipping up his base?
Well, you know, fighting against the perceived threats that he claims are out there from immigration has really been a central theme of both his campaign and his presidency. So he's really returning to what we saw, you know, that first day when he announced his campaign after coming down the escalator and said that, you know, criminals and rapists are coming in from Mexico.
So do you think he's doing this with an eye toward the midterms, or do you think he really is just reacting specifically to this caravan?
You know, I would never purport to get inside the president's head, and it's hard to tell, is this a political play or is this sincere belief on his part? But, you know, the evidence is that immigrants actually commit crimes at lower rates than the rest of the population. And he's long been a bit of a proponent of conspiracy theories about Latino immigrants and Muslim immigrants as well.
Well, speaking of conspiracy theories, he did tweet also that maybe there are Middle Easterns in this caravan as well, sort of hinting to sort of the threat from Middle Eastern terrorists, which of course there doesn't seem to be any evidence that there are Middle Easterns in this caravan.
Right. There's never really been hard proof of a nexus between, you know, immigrants coming from the southern border and terrorism, although that's long been a bit of a bogeyman. But that's not the first conspiracy theory we've seen President Trump float about Latino immigration. I mean, you know, shortly after his announcement speech, he spoke to me and he said that, you know, people were not noticing that he was saying that the Mexican government was literally, quote, pushing the bad ones in and kind of floating this theory that there was a Mexican program to, you know, send criminals into the U.S.
Sort of AKA the Marielito boat, you know, that we all experienced. That's so interesting, that connection. I also want to ask you, though, he's threatening to cut off aid to these many Central American countries as a result of this. Wouldn't that then just make the situation worse, make the poverty more dire, make more people head toward the borders?
I mean, you do see in that fabulous report from Adriana, you know, some of the young people in that caravan are saying they came up because there's not enough money. And it's hard to see how, you know, cutting off foreign aid would improve conditions that these people are fleeing from.
Right. That young man said he hadn't been to school yet and he was 15 years old, which is just heartbreaking to hear that. All right, let's move off of immigration and the caravan for a second to talk about the race in Texas between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. We know that the president is heading out there today to campaign for Ted Cruz. Before we talk about that, let's run a sort of greatest hits between Ted and Trump.
So Lion Ted took a really nice meeting with the RNC, Republican National Committee. Took a really, Raphael. Yeah. Raphael, straight out of the hills of Canada. 4 years in Canada, was a Canadian citizen until 15 months ago.
It's not easy to tick me off. I don't get angry often. But you mess with my wife, you mess with my kids, that'll do it every time. Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
It's L-Y-I-N apostrophe, Lion Ted, the Bible held high. He puts it down and then he lies.
This man is a pathological liar. He lies practically every word that comes out of his mouth.
That never gets old. But let me ask you, is this all just water under the bridge now?
I mean, it would seem to be. You've got, you know, the president has been barnstorming the country ahead of the midterms, and he's making this big stop with a huge tailgate for Ted Cruz. And it's just bizarre to anyone who remembers, you know, him insinuating that Cruz's father was, you know, part of the JFK assassination, that everyone remembers the nickname Lion Ted. So, you know, the question is this just about self-interest? You know, is the president trying to preserve that Senate seat in Texas as the race tightens, or have they really made up? And I don't know the answer.
No, nor do I. But what is the race looking like now? Is it getting tighter?
It is getting tighter. I mean, we've seen, you know, a couple of the recent polls show that, you know, Ted Cruz is 4 or 5 points ahead of Beto O'Rourke, which is indeed, you know, pretty tight, first off, for any race in Texas where we haven't seen a Democrat in over, you know, 2 decades. But also, you know, it's tighter than the race was before. And part of that is happening because Beto O'Rourke just got this huge, you know, staggering haul of $38 million in donations. He's getting a lot of support from around the country in terms of volunteers and people sending small dollar amounts his way.
Yeah, this race has really taken on a national interest. It's not just about Texas.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, two different levels of things happening here. I mean, I'm seeing in New York and D.C. Beto posters, Beto bumper stickers.
Yes, me too, yes.
And I'm also seeing an avalanche of press coverage. You know, everyone's saying Beto is Kennedy-esque and could even be president one day. And it's kind of remarkable for a guy who really has never been closer than 5 points out. But it does seem to be having an effect.
He's got to win that Senate seat first. All right, Hunter, let's move on to the president's approval ratings. They're at the highest they've been for a while. Is this going to help Republicans going into midterms?
I mean, certainly it's very hard. You know, the president is such a singular figure. And even with any president, you know, a midterm race tends to be a referendum on them, which is why we've typically seen, you know, the House kind of switch over and the opposition party do well in the midterms.
Right.
But, you know, I think one thing that the president's doing that I've noticed working in the White House is he's engaging more. You know, they pretty much have abandoned the press briefing, but the president's acting as his own press secretary. He's, you know, holding these extemporaneous sessions in the Oval Office. He was just talking to us all about Saudi Arabia the other day. He's talking extensively every time he goes to the helicopter. And they'd been in a defensive crouch for a really long time. And I think, you know, we are seeing the needle tick upwards in his favor now that the president's speaking out more. So
if the Republicans do manage to hold Congress in 2 weeks, will that embolden the president?
I mean, absolutely. Not only will he have beat back this threat for another 2 years, but I think internally within the Republican Party, you know, we've seen potential threats of primaries. We've seen, you know, people being prominent Trump critics on the right. And I think, you know, the rallying he's doing, and if that does manage to fend off a Democratic takeover, they're basically going to owe him one.
Right. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Khashoggi scandal. We know that Jared Kushner has been a longtime friend of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, but has not spoken out about the situation until recently. Let's hear what he said on CNN recently.
With regards to the situation in Saudi Arabia, I'd say that right now as an administration, we're more in the fact-finding phase, and we're obviously getting as many facts as we can from the different places, and then we'll determine which facts are credible, and then after that, the President and the Secretary of State will make a determination as to what we deem to be credible and what actions we think we should take. I'll also say that we have to be able to work with our allies.
So, of course, Jared Kushner has been facing, you know, some criticism over his relationship with the Crown Prince. Does he have any other option but to tread very lightly here? Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, I did some reporting on this last week, and, you know, I was told that they're sort of leveraging Jared's close relationship with Crown Prince Salman, and that he's deeply, deeply involved in the White House response, which so far has consisted of a push to get Saudi Arabia to do an investigation with Turkish participation. So right now we're seeing Jared Kushner say that, you know, the White House is still sort of in a fact-finding phase of its response. I think the question is that just an attempt to buy time? Or, you know, when we can conclusively say what happened here, if it is found to be, you know, not just the Saudis, but the Crown Prince who was responsible for this, which is what's widely expected,
right,
will the White House take action?
You know, I heard just a bewildering report that the Crown Prince was actually confused as to why everyone was so upset over this, and apparently reached out to Jared Kushner to see if he could explain why this has created such outrage. I mean, just that report itself sounds like a government that is wildly out of touch with today's world.
Well, I think we're getting a lot of bizarre reporting on this, and part of what people need to understand here is that, you know, a lot of the information is coming from Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And in both those cases, you know, these are really intense rivals, and the media is not entirely free in either of those places. Sure. So when we're seeing reports from those countries, you know, there's often an agenda behind it, which makes me wonder why we're not hearing more from American intelligence agencies. Did we have nothing on the ground, you know, monitoring what was happening there? Did we not have intercepts? And how do we not know more about what was going on from our own sources?
Or do we know already and we're just figuring out how to package it?
Right, and you're hearing Jared say two things in, you know, this incredible set of comments he's made. One is that we're still fact-finding, but the other component of it is, listen, Saudi Arabia is very important to our strategic goals, and it's really true. That's what I'm hearing from people around the White House as well. You know, in the Mideast, we want this peace plan between Israel and Palestine. We want to mitigate the situation in Syria, mitigate the situation in Yemen. And in all those cases, Saudi Arabia could be an important ally and is right in the middle of it. So Jared and others are saying we don't want to blow up that relationship for one guy's death.
Hunter Walker, let's hope the truth does come out, though. Great to see you. Thank you so much.